This meeting is being recorded.
Has been working with flower essences and offers classes. Sorry. Okay, so Martin has his flower essence business and offers classes. His classes are truly amazing. If you guys haven't taken it, consider taking them. He will be offering his classes in the spring and a few different ones. If you are interested, sign up for his emails and he will send you emails on classes. Today, he will talk about his own spiritual journey, sharing his experience as he is going through one of the most significant transition periods of his life. This sounds really fascinating, and thank you for sharing such a private part of your life, Martin.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's an amazing experience for us. So just quickly, let's talk about some housekeeping businesses for the Guild. We have 2 volunteer positions available for the Guild. We are especially looking for people who have technical experience or IT knowledge. Most of us are herbalists. So computer, how the computers work. If you're interested, please contact the Guild. And another thing I'd like to mention is our next meeting will be on December 11th. It's a celebration and fundraiser. Our speaker will be Erica Fagioni. If you are interested in donating for our silent auction, also please contact the Guild. And that's it. And let's listen to Martin.
All right, that's a better introduction than I would have done myself. Okay. Just for comparison, this was the first draft of this talk.
Oh, just the door. Yeah, lights on. Just the door.
And basically, I have been working with flower remedies since 1990, I guess is when I started. At least that's when I made my first flower remedy. And primarily, I'm mostly self-taught, which is kind of like a little embarrassing in some ways because, you know, I don't have a lot of teachers other than that word to point to, but nothing else. The flowers themselves have been my teachers. So one thing that I've discovered is that flower essence therapy in general is just basically spirit healing at a spiritual level, which is very different than just worrying just strictly the physical. We're getting again this first 3 minutes just like
this new video, that and that.
Gross.
Iron,
coming
smoke,
up with.
heat, educated on motion array.
One thing that I have noticed a lot is that particularly people who have maybe haven't used flower essences very much, or even more particular clients who you're trying to get the remedies for. One thing you find about flower essence therapy is that it's a very, very easy, simple technique to use at a simplistic and somewhat superficial level. But it can be very, very difficult and require a lot of skills to do it well. And so what I've been doing for the last few years is trying to figure out how would I explain in detail how I practice, and that's turning into a book, which will be, I've got some time to go with that one yet, but
Can you speak up a little bit?
okay, all right, I'll try. Okay, I'll try. My voice doesn't carry very well. So what I'm looking at is how can we take our practice to a deeper and deeper level, where we just get past the superficial route. And So what I'm looking at here is let's take this whole idea of spiritual healing to a more significant level, to something that's going to be a little bit more in depth than what we have here. And in particular, the topic I'm looking at today is in detail is going to be going through transitions in life. And how do you work with somebody who's going through these major transitions? There's one case history we're talking about. This guy here. I'm currently in the process of semi-retirement, trying to disengage from present moment, not having very much success at it. Just finding that it's a very, very big transition to go from being working stiff to being on your own and not responsible to a lot of other people. I really wasn't prepared for the intensity of this transition myself when I started into this, but for the last year or two, I've just been having to deal with this and dealing with how do you make sense of it at these deeper levels. So yeah, I'll be the case history here. Now, I will be the first person to say this is not necessarily going to be a well-organized linear lecture by any means. There's a lot of stories, a lot of things. I've done my best to try and put them in a sensible order that will make sense, but no guarantees how that's going to turn out. And it's more stories than lecture, and it's more about how do you practice rather than individual remedies, stuff like that. I came up with the name of the Spirit Energetic Healing last May. Thank you, Miriam, for all our great discussions that we had for these things. But I will also say that to do this lecture justice, the subtitle of it is Words of Wisdom from an Old Fart. So that's kind of like how we're going to approach this. And like this is no linear order that goes from point A to point B. It's going to like spiral around all over the place. And we're going to go in some strange places here. Okay, now, as I say, I've been working on how do you teach this stuff? How do you explain it? And in the last 5 years, 5.5 years or so, I've actually been writing a book. It's about 2/3 done on the first draft at this point, where I go into detail exactly how do I approach doing work with clients for flower essence work. And it goes into an incredible amount of depth that would probably like bore the shit off you tonight. So you'll have to wait for the book to come out, I guess, but before we can really get talking about tonight, I will have to like give you just a little brief 101 class of one chapter. So like the next 5 or 10 minutes is a distillation of about 25 pages of text. So take it for what it's worth here. As I said, flower essence therapy is about energy. And unlike, well, for lack of a better term, classical herbalism, it's not about chemistry, all about energy. And so the problem then boils down to like, what do I mean by subtle energy? And how do you work with it? So just the basics of what I call my subtle energy model is as follows. We're talking about working with people's energy bodies, or if you want to replace it by the word aura, that's the more common term for it. But I invented the word energy body for my book, and I find that actually is going to be the most focused way of looking at the topic. So subtle energy is just this, who knows what it is? I mean, all I know is that it's energy, it makes changes happen, it causes things to happen, it's responsible for all of existence as we know it. What it is, I don't know, frankly, I don't care. All I'm worried about is how do you experience it? How do you work with it? How do you see it in the person that you're doing flower essences for? And how are you able to change your states of consciousness in a way that makes it easier to work with the energies? So like I said, I will go through 25 pages in one of the chapters of my book to say these are all these things, but here's kind of like the basics. Okay, energy is energy. That's about all you really need to say. It is going to be like the source of reality first, the source of existence, not only physical, but also the non-physical stuff. It's intelligent. It knows how to make us to be the kind of beings that we are. It teaches us. It laughs at us when we're being stupid and ridiculous. And it may or may not be the same thing as what they call consciousness. I flip back and forth on this on a regular basis, but it's intimately connected with consciousness also. And it happens to be organized around the physical body in the way that we recognize. You've all seen those pictures in the books about the aura where they look like these big eggshells that sit around you, and they come in different layers and stuff like that. So first of all, yes, so that's basically it's organized energy is what we're dealing with here. And you don't necessarily experience it directly, but there are at least 4 main pathways that you're going to get when you experience these things. This is what I call the PEMS system, P-E-M-S. P stands for the physical. When you experience energy at the physical level, it's this stuff here. This stuff. You can experience it through a different lens, and it's come across, you'll experience it to get the energy of this second level is that it comes across as emotions and feelings. You will actually, when you're talking to your person, you will see, they're they're having emotional reactions to their life. They're doing things that express their emotional qualities. You get to feel them, you get to react to them. So you got that kind of emotional quality that goes to the energy. The mental level is what we think of as thoughts, ideas, the way that we communicate with each other, the way we talk to each other, our words, our language. So yeah, energy comes across. If you feel the mental level, that's going to be what you're going to experience is pretty much the spoken word and all its variations. Basically coming right through the level of the throat chakra, which is where the language comes from here. And then there's a 4th level that I just call it, for lack of a better term, the spiritual level or the spirit level. The S level is really fascinating because the best way to describe it is not any of the other 3. It's all the other weird shit that happens in life. And it's the stuff that doesn't make sense. It's totally illogical sometimes. It defies your normal rational ideas of how the world should work. It taunts you, it teases you, it blows your mind in all sorts of different levels. And it just is describing that spiritual, energetic basis of that stands behind the reality that we're used to. We're going to be spending most of the time tonight talking about the spirit level, because I think this is where it's kind of hard to talk about some of these things too, because they can be very vague and in a script sometimes. But the spirit level is basically kind of like the motivating force behind the way that a human being grows and changes and goes through their lives. In a lot of ways, what we call spirit is going to be indistinguishable from depth psychology, particularly working with the unconscious mind and all the beings and spirits and so on that inhabit our unconscious world. So when I use the word spirit, it can be used in terms, kind of like that more religious, religious occultist kind of way of looking at it, or you can look at it in kind of more psychological terms. They flip back and forth so easily that I just use the two types of worlds interchangeably with each other. But the thing about spirituality is, one, it tends to be unconscious. People tend to be not really aware of what's going on at this level. I mean, our society is just plain not built to work with the spirit level very much. You know, we're down at physical, emotional, and a little bit of mental. Our mental state is kind of crazy these days, as we've learned. But when you get, those are very good at like interpreting out the way the energy works, but spirit really comes across more as just direct, deep experience. It's not mediated by words. It's not mediated by feelings necessarily. Those are kind of like the side effects of how spirit works. But the direct experience of it is just really direct and profound and can be extremely life-changing when you really tune into it at a deep level. So this is kind of like the main topic of what I'm looking at today, particularly from the psychological point of view, which is one of my preferred things. The third basic idea that I deal with in my model of subtle energy is what I call the field concept. You're probably familiar with some of the things like magnetic fields and stuff like that, where the energy is organized in certain geometric patterns and stuff like that. It flows, it changes. Subtle energy is organized like this as well. All those eggshells and the aura that we were talking about, those are different layers and geometrical structures within the way that energy is organized. And it changes over time, and it's flowing, it's moving, it does all sorts of weird stuff, and sometimes when it gets messed up, it'll get misshapen and form these deformations in the field. One of the ones that I talk about a lot in the stuff that I'm writing these days is what I call blobs. Blobs, B-L-O-B, very simple. It just means the energy is kind of like stuck in this static, non-flowing pattern. Usually it contains a lot of traumatic experiences, old emotions, tons and tons of emotions, screwed up thought patterns. It can filter down even to the physical body, where instead of like being happy, which you got a blob of something, you can wind up doing this. You know, the body changes. Even when it filters down to the physical levels to an extreme extent, it actually causes physical illnesses. So a lot of what I've been writing about the last couple of years is care and feeding of your blobs. How we deal with them. You know, there's a whole section that's called the life cycle of a blob. Which is actually, yeah, it sounds cute, but it's basically a lengthy discussion on the trauma mechanism in people. So as part of the geometric structure, the field structure of this energy, you know, these things here. And a lot of fluorescence work can be just described as just trying to get rid of blobs. There's a fourth idea that I call nods, which is basically how do you change your state of awareness? I've got some very, very precise techniques that seem to be very, very good at getting people like being able to change their state of consciousness at will and very quickly. And this comes in very, very handy when you're having to do pulse testing with somebody, because unlike a lot of people who are reading that physical bump, bump, bump going on the wrist, one thing that I found very early on when I was studying with Matt Wood was that I found that I was ignoring the physical pulse completely. Because when I was doing this, basically my energy body is talking to your energy body, and we just communicate at that nonverbal energetic level, and it allows me to feel what's going on inside you. Which when you come to doing fluorescence work is an amazing skill to master. Because not only do the flower remedies have energies that you can feel, the person having the flower remedy has their own energies that they can feel. And as Lise likes to say, I run a dating service for these to try and match up, you know, which remedies go with which people. And when you can figure out how to work at this level, you do some damn good work. Now, tonight I'm focusing mainly on just the process of how we practice these things. I won't be talking about the individual remedies so much, sorry, because I know a lot of people really just like to know which remedies are good for what things. But I brought one bottle here. We are going to discuss this at the end, so I haven't forgotten you completely. This is the one for me for going through my process right now. And it's called Old Fart Formula. We'll go over that one in great detail. Because that, you know, I'll talk for an hour, but that remedy talks more than I'm going to tonight. So, all right. So that's kind of like the model that I'm working with, and I'll be using this kind of terminology throughout the talk. Now, I have to state one other obvious but very elusive fact before we can really start to dive in. And this fact is that life in the spirit path that we are all on is about time and about change. A human being is born, goes through various stages of life, adolescence, adulthood, get married, get a job, blah, 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 raise the kids, kick the kids out. And at some point you reach the stage where you're like, oh, I'm done working. Done with that. And then you reach this very interesting stage that's, well, I guess the preferred term would be something like elder. You become a person that's kind of like moved beyond the cares and concerns of the daily world and has to basically tend to themselves for the first time in a long time. And of course, then the final transition point through this is the death experience, where we move out of this real experience and we just like stop working at the physical level anymore and just move into some of these higher levels where we don't have to worry about bodies anymore. Thing about relating human life with time change like this is that the way that human beings describe their changing life is through the stories that they tell about themselves. So we experience life through our stories, both stories about who we are, but also stories about how we make these changes and transitions in our lives. And when a person comes in for a flower essence consultation with me, the first thing we do is we sit them down and I just say, so what brings you here? Because what I want to do is I want to hear their story. They'll go on for 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes they go on for an hour and a half. But when you hear the stories, those are going to give you some clues as to how their energy body works. And when you understand the transitions and the mechanisms and the flow patterns and so on that are going on in the energy body, you get some really damn good ideas about how to go about addressing their things using the flower essences, because the flower essences themselves are just energy patterns. Energy pattern talks to energy pattern, things change. And so the big transitions in life, though, are when these stories change. And this is why the big transition periods in life are so fascinating to me, because the energy body is literally changing before your third eye. And you get to see how all the patterns and all the stories that the person has internalized about themselves are changing and undergoing, their own transitions. And as the energy body changes, the person changes, their behavior changes, their emotional patterns change, their mental patterns change, their spiritual life changes, and even physically they're changing. As you can tell, I'm not the suave man that I used to be here. But you have to make room for the body to change, not just theoretically as an energy body changing. How does the person change at each of the PEMS levels, the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual? These are going to be the clues in the language that you use for talking about the energies and for figuring out how to address them using certain flower remedies. And in fact, one of the things that's very, very interesting as the stories change is that these blobs that we've been talking about, those also change and shift. Because you're getting rid of certain stories, certain stuck behavior patterns, and replacing it with something new. So the transitions are always going to be times of letting go and learning how to assimilate new points of view that are going to be the keys to how you're going to be working from this point on. Now, Edward Bach was the fellow who invented the flower essence techniques back in 90 years ago, in the mid-30s, basically. He always described this as spiritual work. More precisely, spiritual work that leads to physical healing. Unlike modern practitioners, he did not give a damn about what was happening to you emotionally or mentally. Because all those were just symptom patterns and clues as to how to deal with the energies. He was very fond of quoting a little aphorism that he had that says, treat the person, not the disease. You aren't worried about symptoms. You don't, if all you're doing is clearing up symptom patterns, you're not doing this work right. Now, I'm gonna like, rough on people tonight. People who are like maybe not operating at the level I am. Warn you, I say all my worst criticism for myself, so don't take anything personally that I'm going to say tonight. So what does spiritual healing mean? Well, I've read everything I can get my hands on that he wrote. And frankly, he talks like a crazy new age guru. It makes very, very little sense half the time. And I've never really been satisfied with anything he's described as this is what spiritual healing means. Which of course means that I have to figure out my own explanation. And that's what my writing in the book is all about here. He had some very, very idealistic ideas of how this is going to work and totally impractical and all that. But just keep in mind that the system that he originally developed is very different in a lot of the ways that modern people, modern practitioners practice flower essence therapy. And sometimes we need to go back and look at the old dudes who did this work originally and try to figure out what they were doing, because a lot of what we've created over the years kind of shaky. That doesn't necessarily work as well as I'd like to. He was developing the flower essence work for a period of about 8 years. He died at the age of 50.
Wow.
20 years longer than he has. I've always been fascinated what he would have done if he'd lived a little bit longer, because he missed things like genetics, the discovery of DNA and stuff like that. And I think he would have had to deal with things. His system probably would have developed in some very different directions if he'd been around for 20 more years. I have these in my notes. I'll throw this one out just because the hell of it, because I'm kind of in a contemporary mood with this talk. But he died at the age of 50 in 1936 from cancer and heart disease. And he died pretty much in poverty. His net worth at the time that he died was 50 British pounds. Which he left one of his co-workers to say, like, look, just throw this into the center and keep the work going. Which none of the money actually went to his family. It's just to his co-workers at this point. Dying in poverty is something I'm not inclined to follow. I don't think this is a very good pattern for us to buy into, but I'm trying to do my best not to do that. So anyway, the spiritual level, like I said, is largely unconscious and unknown to modern people. We're not really, really good at getting behind the ego and figuring out what's going on at these deeper levels inside our mind. And in fact, when I say unconscious or unknown, the German word for unconscious, and if you look at the old psychoanalytic texts that came out of the same time period, the word for unconscious that they use is Unbewussten, which translates from German to literally mean the unknown. So when we're doing this kind of work, we are literally stepping into the unknown parts of the person, trying to figure out how to get those patterns to work properly, so that these patterns that are operating in the background don't sit here and sabotage us all the time. And it's really fun, like, it's, everyone's totally oblivious to their own unconscious. That's just by the nature of the way the psyche works. But the stuff that's going on there is sometimes the most obvious stuff. Anyone else can see that, yeah, you got these issues going on. Well, what do you mean? I don't got those issues. You know, we don't even recognize it. We don't have names for it. We can't, you know, put our focus on it. And even if we can, you know, and things can be life-changing, we still don't even know what's going on. And if we are able to talk about it at all, it's very vague language that borders on this level where it's halfway between making logical sense and halfway like, I don't know. So, and it's that borderline, and my technical word for it is what I call the Gok boundary. Gok is just a word I invented because it means that's the ground of knowledge. That's where our ideas are based from. And that boundary is the boundary between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And so most of our language, most of our words are going to be on near this Gok boundary where they sound like they make sense, but if you really take the ideas apart at a detailed level, you realize that they contradict themselves, they make no sense, they just fall apart. And so this is the level that we have to start understanding ourselves at this level where we don't understand ourselves anymore. That's the spiritual level. That's the one that we're talking about tonight. So I realize I'm already starting to get these faces like, what? So bear with me. It gets better. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is like, how do we practice fluorescence therapy at this spiritual level rather than the more common things like emotional issues and, you know, physical stuff, and, you know, having weird ideas or having a bad relationship with your mom and dad, or, you know, the usual things that you're going to see mostly in your practice. Because modern practitioners and modern clients do not really understand what's going on, and they've forgotten and abandoned how to work at this level. Bach, I think, was working at this level pretty precisely, but he just wasn't able to explain it in intelligible fashion as far as I'm concerned. So the problem with this kind of modern practice is that we are operating at a level where we are still unconscious of this deeper level, what's going on. We don't really understand, or we aren't even in touch with this level for the most part. Some people will be really, really good, particularly if you have, you know, some training or study in psychology, will at least make some room for these ideas. But for the most part, we're practicing it while being totally unaware of this whole spiritual level. And so what does that mean for the way we're practicing? Well, one of the things is, and what does it mean for the client that this is the way we're practicing? It basically means we're not taking the energy body seriously. We aren't taking it as a reality. And so we're just basically dealing with the superficial symptoms and patterns and signatures of the person that we're dealing with, of the flower remedies that we're dealing with, of the practitioners that we're dealing with. I mean, we're all kind of like operating in this foggy, fuzzy level that we aren't really aware of even how to talk about it and make sense of it. So basically, working at the unconscious spiritual level means that we're totally spacing out a very, very significant part of our healing practice. At best, any good results that you get are going to be accidental, unintended, or maybe you were just lucky because you instinctively know how to work with these things. And this is why I say we need to do better. And this means that we need to start becoming aware of the spiritual level more. And particularly, we need to become aware of your own spiritual level better and how these things work. It's very interesting, like two of my favorite people on the healing path were, well, Edward Bach, one people, but the other one is Carl Jung, the psychologist. I've probably read and studied more Jungian psychology than the average person ever should. It warps your brain after a few years. But they both had a very, very similar experience in their lives when they were starting to get into their life's work. When Edward Bach decided to quit being well, first of all, he quit being a medical doctor and became a homeopath. And then after doing his homeopathy for about 10 years, he decided like, no, this is not my path either. I need to like figure out what the next step is. And he was saying like we need to like figure out some way to go back to nature and figure out a good healing response. So when I say, finding your spiritual path, I'll use the number of terms here totally interchangeably because they basically all mean the same thing. There's what path are you on? There's what myth am I following and expressing in my life? What is my story that's coming through me that expresses who I am? What kind of archetypes, that's a psychological term that relates to the unconscious. What are the archetypes that dominate my behavior? And kind of like more of a spiritual thing, what's my calling in life? What am I being drawn to do? What is literally saying like, this is what you're supposed to be doing, get busy. I had one herbalist / astrologer that I had a reading for back in 1987, I think it was. One of the few times I had someone else read my chart because I do all my own astrology, but she basically looked at my chart and says like, why are you a computer programmer? You're supposed to be a healer, get busy. So whenever you get those taps on the shoulder that say, this is what you're supposed to be doing, you damn well better listen because it's important. So Edward Bach, when he quit his practice in London and moved out to well, he first moved to the wilds of Wales and just started studying plants and just walking the countryside. He was dominated by one major question. He was a hardcore people watcher and just loved to watch people and their behavior patterns. And he started realizing that people form like similar groups or similar behavior patterns, and that you can always just go along and find that they hit these basic constitutional types. The way they behave, the way they operate, the way their bodies look, the way they talk. The whole expression of their energy body was coming through in some very stereotypical ways. And he was saying like, okay, we got this kind of category, that category, that category, that. And so he was going like, oh, maybe we just need to like treat these constitutional types and then we'll have a great healing system. He was stopped right away by one big question. He says, what is my type? What's my constitution? What's my remedy? And so part of what he was doing was just trying to walk around and find some plant that talked to him energetically in a way that he recognized like, oh, you and I talk the same language. I need you as a remedy. Incidentally, it was impatience. If you've studied Bach's biography, you'll find, yeah, he could be a pretty annoying, cantankerous guy at times. And just really didn't have a lot of patience for anybody who wasn't operating at 100% capacity all the time. So once he found that, he found that just taking that remedy not only like made him calmer and more patient, but it actually started curing some of his physical diseases. I mean, he'd already been diagnosed 15 years earlier with cancer that nearly killed him before he could do any of this work. But he found that the more he got in this work, the cancer was at bay. He was, not having any trouble with his health. But he was also prone to trigeminal nerve pain, where the nerves that come through the skull that innervate the face, when they get irritated, it is the most excruciating, painful thing in the world. It's always described as like the worst pain that humans can possibly experience. He found that when he started taking these inpatients, that this trigeminal nerve pain just disappeared. So he's going like, oh, we can cure illnesses with this. This is great. Let's do this. So, but it wasn't until he asked that question, what is my myth, that he was able to start making progress in this kind of work. And so then the remaining 7, 8 years of his life was just him trying to like track down all the plant myths that he could and make the remedies out of them. And came up with what we now call the Bach problem. Okay, very similar. Jung had a very similar experience. Jung originally worked with Sigmund Freud, and around 1912, 1913, he and Freud had this falling out, which was not hard to do. Apparently, the whole psychoanalytic community in Europe at the time was a kind of a mess. People were flopping in and out of different schools all the time. But anyway, Jung had a falling out major falling out with Freud. This was just after he came out with a book called Symbols of Transformation, which was his big masterpiece at the time, where he was describing the role of mythic symbols in people's behavior at an unconscious level. And particularly had this amazing case history of some young woman that he had managed to like get the medical records of. And he analyzed her fantasies and her hallucinations and so on, and realized that it related to world mythology all over the place. And so he started studying all this world mythology to try and figure out, what are these basic behavior patterns that are represented by these. This was his entry point into what he would later call the archetypes of the unconscious. But the first question that he asked himself was, what is my myth? I mean, he was having all sorts of wild psychic experiences his whole life, going back to when he was a kid, but he really did not have a good clue what was the mythological pattern or story that he was living out and why it was important. And so he said, like, I just have to like take some time off to figure out what is my myth. And he spent the next 3 years studying his own psyche with the help of his wife and his lover at the time, who acted as his psychotherapist. Actually, everyone was in this threesome perhaps being therapists for the other 3. It was just, would have been a really crazy experience to go through this. But one of the things that we found was that he was starting to have a series of intense, visionary internal experiences that was introducing him to all the archetypal characters that were going on in his psyche. And he spent some, 3 years just operating at the level of going schizophrenic in order to study these things and get to know them. And when he finally came out of this period of what he called his encounter with the unconscious, this is like, okay, now I have a clue how the psyche works. Now I can be a psychologist. And that's formed the basis for the next 40 years of his work. But his question was, what's my myth? And he was astonished to realize, I don't have a clue. I have to figure this out because I can't do anything until I figure out what my story is. And so he just went through that encounter, and he came out with just a motherload of material that is, it may be poo-pooed by a lot of people. People look at me like he's a little bit old-fashioned these days, but it is still just an amazing amount of material that he pulled out of there. So essentially what I'm doing with my book is I'm asking, what is my myth? And this whole subtle energy model that we're talking about tonight is kind of like my answer to what's this mythology and how does it work in your own feeling? Now, this relies on the fact that myths are not just these passive little fairy tales and so on, the little stories that you tell. They are active symbols. They're energies. They're expressions of the energy body itself. And so when you start discovering what your mythology is, you are getting in touch with your own energy body. And that is going to be the basis of any work that you're going to be doing from now on. What I did not take into account when I was starting to do all this writing and stuff like this is that these are active symbols. They work on you, they change you, they mess with you. And I wasn't really prepared for the depth of the experience, what happens when these myths start to work on you. So this is kind of like the vague expression of what is going on in my life in terms of trying to experience my mythology. Now, there's some other questions that are similarly important. When a client comes to you for flower essence work, what's their myth? What's their story? Like I said, the first thing I ask when we sit down and start to talk is just like, who, why are you here? What's your story? What's going on in your life? What's affecting you? Why? Because I'm trying to, if I can get enough clues from the story, I can start to piece together what's going on energetically with them. And then I know how to treat them. Until I know what their story is, I'm clueless like anyone else is. But when you can figure out what the story is at all the PEMS levels, then you guys have really good clues of what are going on. So what is your client's story? What are they bringing to you to start addressing? Where is their story causing them problems in life? How can you change the story in order to get them to move to the next level of behavior where life is going to be more, it works better for them. It gives them that quality of feeling like I'm better now. I feel like I'm healthy now. I feel like my life is going better now. And this just raises a really good question, and this is one that we probably need to ask our clients a little bit more often, is what does healing mean to you? You came here to get better. What does better mean for you? How can you get rid of the stuff that's causing you trouble? Why is it causing you trouble? There's all that whole level of questions. And if you know what healing means to them, then you're in a better place to provide healing to them using the tools that we have. But if you don't ask the question, you're just throwing remedies at them because you think they're good, and they may not be appropriate. They may not be the stuff that's compatible with them. We need to figure out, what's healing for them. How does it feel? How does it work for them? And if you take it out even a little bit farther step, you're forming a relationship with the client. What's the mythology behind that relationship as well? How's that connection between healer and client work together in order to make a connection where things mesh for the person? How do you walk a healing path with this person? You're probably a lot of people you're only going to see once, and they'll never come back to you. The best clients are always the ones that keep coming back to you year after year after year, because you get to see how the energy body evolves over time. You get to see how their understanding of themselves evolve over time. You evolve in your understanding of them. And it's that relationship that's going to be really important. That relationship also has a story. Do you understand the story of how you're relating to this person or not? And if you do understand it, you're going to be able to do a lot better healing with them than if you're just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. So, and one little last tidbit of studying all these myths. We're dealing with plant energies. That's all that a remedy is. It's just the energy of the plant. And plants have their own mythologies. They're intelligent beings just like we are. It's the same energy that empowers us and makes us intelligent beings is also the same energy that makes a plant a plant. And it's their energy body that tells them how to be the plant they are and how to be the healers that they are. And you need to understand the mythology of the plants. And you have to bring all these stories together somehow or another so that they all work together. So, okay. It's called a spiritual path. It's not called a destination. You do not reach the end of your spiritual path just because you've taken one remedy and things are better now. You need to basically, and again, I'm having kind of a very idealistic approach to the way I'm approaching, fluorescence therapy here. Ideally, you're not trying to just treat individual symptoms or individual situations in the person's life. I've got anger issues. Or like I'm depressed. Well, which of the 15 levels of depression are you on? I've got a relationship problem. And people always come to you and say, they give you this little word salad of what's going on in their life that very frequently have little, if anything, to do with the way that the energy body is actually responding to their lives. And they're just these little individuals. They're just little one-off experiences they're having. It's not really the whole theme of what's going on. The energy body is in the back going like, well, that's just like one little chapter in the story, or just like one page of the story, basically. There's this whole pattern that you need to address. And so, to be idealistic about it, you don't want to treat all these little individual symptoms. You want to treat the person's entire life. You want the whole spiritual path they're on to operate in such a way that their life works well, their energy body works well. So ideally, it's the whole person, the whole energy body, their whole life that really needs to be made whole and complete and brought together in a harmonious fashion. Not just these little incidents and issues that keep coming up for people. So the best relationships therapeutically are the ones that last years, not a couple of minutes. I am really, really disgusted at the present moment these days, because when people come in for flower remedies at the store these days, due to a lot of work politics and stuff like that, I'm really only able to spend about 5 minutes with anybody. And it really is just a matter of like, spout out the words that you want to be treated, and I'll try and match it up with some remedy. We'll pulse test it just to make sure that it's not all really off the wall, and then you throw away. That as a way to practice totally sucks. You'll find me ranting and raving about that style of practice a lot. And when the book comes out, you'll realize that I rant and rave about it in the book on a regular basis. It's what I call good for prescribing. This remedy is good for that issue. This remedy is good for that issue. And you're not treating issues, you're treating people. Treat the person, not the disease, not the symptoms. And you need to take the long view. It's not just what's happening to you today. It's what's happening to you over the course of your entire life. That's really what you are ideally focusing on. And when you can start to practice with that kind of a perspective, you're doing something totally different. I had some young woman who's been coming with me for flower remedies at the store. She came in last week and said like, oh, I want something so I can focus my work better, and I want to focus, having some seasonal affects, that, just the usual word salad that comes out of people's mouths. And this is when I was sitting here feverishly going through my notes every night, just trying to put it in order. And I'm back in my mind looking and going like, oh, you don't realize how much I'm just cringing listening to you talk to me like this. This is the most horrible way to deal with flower remedies that I rant and rave against this all the time. I just spent my 5 minutes with her. I gave her a couple of remedies she liked, but I don't like to work like that. It's not good for me. It's not good for the client, and it's disrespectful for how powerful the technique like fluorescence therapy actually is. We can do better. We can do much better. So, yeah, the good clients are the ones you keep coming back, because you then get to see how the long-term evolution develops. And then you really start to get a good idea of how these things work. So yeah, let's treat the entire spiritual path, not just the individual incidents. You have to work with the tools that you have at any given time. You have to work with your own level of consciousness, your own level of awareness, which means if you're going to be good at this stuff, first person you need to be working properly is yourself. You need to be able to learn how to work with your own state of consciousness so that you can tune into the energy body, so that when you take a pulse, you can feel what's going on, not necessarily just what's in the body or particularly under that artery there, but that you can go out, say like, oh, you got something going on here. There's a blob over there. There's this pattern over there. The way that your mental body and your emotional body they're not cooperating with each other well. They're kind of like going off in separate directions. And you usually see these people where, they'll think one thing, but when they act impulsively on their emotions, they'll do something totally different. And so they're at odds with themselves at a very, very profound level, because at these two different levels, they aren't cooperating, they're in harmony with each other. But you need to learn how to work with yourself so that you can start to see what these patterns are and start to work with them a little bit more. And that involves being able to change your consciousness so that when you put your fingers on the person's wrist, you're not paying attention to the wrist, you're paying attention to all this other stuff. And that gets you into a wholly, totally different space. But it's by working on yourself that you learn how to do this. You realize after a while that when you use words like spiritual or your life or your healing path, deep down, they're really all just one of the same things. Life just is what it is. It's got its own rules and its own way of dealing with things. The energy works the way it is. It's got its own path for these things. And the more you tune into the energies, the more you get into the deeper, profound level of what's going on with this person. You aren't just digging into superficial stuff anymore. You can't really just separate a person into different separate little pieces. Oh, here's what your emotions are doing. Here's what your thought patterns are doing. Here's what's going on in your physical body. And you can, if you look at it very superficially, you can treat each of these as separate problems and try to fix things person at different levels. And you can be chasing symptoms from now till kingdom come. And stuff keeps coming back over and over and over again. You don't really resolving anything through it. But if you can see all the pieces as being part of just one energy body and start to work there, then your therapy becomes one of being able to bring all these pieces that we tend to separate, because that's the ego mind is very good at separating things into different pieces. You need to get behind that ego style of thinking and just see the whole, not the different pieces that are going on. You realize that it's not just how do we heal you at this moment, but how do we heal the entire life path that you have here? It's a sobering realization that we're so used to putting our spiritual life as something separate from everyday life. And you have to realize that you're always walking your spiritual path. That's what life is. That's, your entire life is spiritual path we're talking about. Trouble is we just don't know it. We don't recognize it most of the time because we split ourselves up into pieces and we put the spirit stuff on the shelf where we don't have to think about it much. But, as your understanding evolves and emerges over the course of life, you just have to you start seeing that this is all integrated. This is all connected. It's all whole. You never really know where your path is going to take you. But if you have the trust that your path is taking you somewhere, then you can just settle into trusting it and letting the healing flow from that's that idea that you can trust this. And in fact, I would probably take Bach's little aphorism and change it a bit. Treat the path, not the symptom. We're sitting here trying to treat the entire life cycle of the person, not just the individual incidents and issues that are going on. So essentially, your spiritual path is the same as your life. And if you can do that, this opens you up to start working at the spiritual level you might need to be doing. Okay, and this involves basically just, like I said, just taking the energy body seriously. And realize that it's real. I had this one, my beginning classes, the only place where I really teach pulse testing. And I like to, in the class, I'd like to just do a mock consultation. We pick someone in the group and say, like, okay, you're our client. You know, they tell their little story, and then we like do some exploration of what's going on, you know, with their body language and the way that they express themselves, and you know, how they hold themselves, you know, all the usual things. And as you tune in, and here again, I kind of like take the little knob and switch it, like, okay, let's look at things more energetically. And I start saying, oh yeah. So in this particular case, you know, so you know, notice how she talks, notice her behavior, how she holds herself, how the body is trying to like slump over and protect the heart chakra area. Da da da. Oh, and by the way, she's got this little blob over here. You know, I just said that very offhanded fashion. I didn't even think twice about it. But one of the students over in Curtis is like, you see that blob? You mean this stuff is real? I didn't even know how to answer her question because, well, obvious is real. I didn't talk about it wasn't real. But yeah, but once you become aware of the energy body, yeah, it's real. You work with this stuff all the time, and it becomes a very, very, it's something you can work with. You realize the whole energy body is integrated into a whole, even when it kind of like falls apart, even when you got the little blobs that you need to work with. And we'll be dealing with blobs more as we get through this talk. And I'm gonna have to like pick things up because we're on page 3 out of 7. But all the blobs is just it's just a area of stasis in the energy field that's not flowing and operating properly. And it usually contains a lot of gory garbage that you've collected from life. And it's a lot of trauma and a lot of issues that are just going on. Okay, so let's focus more on taking the whole life back, looking in terms of like periods of your life and the transitions between those periods of life. As you said, you know, we've got tons of experiences that are going on here. And the average person goes through dozens of major transitions in their life. Some of them are going to be easy to cope with, and you know, you just kind of like slip into a new way of operating. You get a job and you buy some good clothes for wearing to the office and put your jeans away and and you figure out how to like operate with the people in your office without, you know, getting into all sorts of emotional arguments with them and stuff like that. And you learn how to like keep that lovely mask on so that you can interact with people without causing trouble. So the transitions though are the periods where these behavior patterns, the stories we tell, the myths we live, are changing from one set of stories and behaviors to another. And so it's these shifts. Now, unlike the everyday incidents and issues that people have, your anger issues and all that other crap, those kind of behaviors change very rapidly. You know, if you watch any person and just monitor how their emotional nature changes, you'll see that they're changing every few minutes. Things are moving quickly, but the major transitions of life are the slow motion ones. They're the ones that you can go through for months and years at a time. And instead of having, you know, energies that go like that, you're getting the energy patterns that are going slow patterns, slow changes, take time. They operate in a very imperceptible fashion in many cases. And they're transparent. People don't really see them most of the time. So it's just saying like, maybe we need to like treat the everyday issues and the bigger transitions differently with flowering ways. So let's see if we can like figure out some stuff. Realize, first of all, transition is going to be time of spiritual crisis signs. You can always get into these ideas where you get into these spiritual meltdown periods. There's a phrase by one of my favorite authors. His name is Stanislav Grof, G-R-O-F. If you see any book that he's written, pick it up, read it. I highly recommend him all over the place. He had this concept we call spiritual emergency, which is basically where the person is in a meltdown phase at a psychological level, and they don't really know how to cope. And they often wind up in the psych wards of hospitals because modern medicine has no idea how to deal with these people other than to throw them in the ward and fill them full of medications. But what's Groff found is that what they were really having was not a psychological breakdown, but a spiritual breakdown. And when he was able to start working with them to work through their spiritual crises, they came out amazingly well on the other side. And yeah, they had no need to go through the psych ward stuff anymore. So these working through a transition time is highly valuable. If nothing else, it's easier to work in a transition period than it is to work when the person's in a kind of like a static behavior pattern, because they're already changing. Their energy body's already in a state of breaking down. The old patterns don't work. The old stories don't work. And so they don't have to work for you already. All you need to do with the flower remedies is just to point them in the right direction so they can figure out how to resolve it all. And so working with the transition period is probably the most fruitful time that you're ever going to find in order to work with your clientele. But you have to, the energy body is just more mutable, more changeable, and it's more permeable. Things will, you can say things to them during these times and they'll get it. If you said this exact same things to them before the transition zone, they would not understand what you're talking about. They'll just kind of look at you and like, huh? But when they're in the middle of the crisis, they'll say like, oh, I understand what you're saying to me now. It's okay. It's okay. There's healing on there. So one of the problems with the word spiritual, and this is why I'm a little bit loath to use this one for that fourth level of the PEM system, but it's the one that stuck to my thing, is that we tend to associate the word spiritual with like love and light, all that high-minded, everything's wonderful and beautiful and stuff like that. And you will find more often than not, when you're in the middle of these crisis times, it is not love and light. There's lots of shadow work, there's lots of heavy lifting, there's lots of psychological change that needs to be going on. You're going through the process of learning how to become fully human. And that's never easy to do. And it can be very painful. Couple of quotes that I just want to throw out here for good idea, particularly this idea of shadow work. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of shadow, but this is an idea that Jung invented. It was the first archetype that you experience when you go into the unconscious. Basically, the ego likes to look beautiful and great. The whole purpose of the ego is to look good and impress people, basically. All the stuff that is that icky, yucky stuff that you don't want anyone to know about, you don't want to see, you don't even want to think about it yourself. You just let that disappear into the unconscious where it's unknown, you don't have to think about it, and it just kind of like sits there and does its own thing, but it messes with you the whole time. It's going to make life difficult because those patterns that you don't want to like face up to, they keep poking their nose out at you. And so a lot of the self-destructive and conflicted behavior patterns that you see in people are just simply because their shadow everyone's kind of blows out. My drinking buddy and I came up with a term for this recently. We call it a shadow crash, where the shadow just like appears and kind of takes over life, and all your bad insights comes out for everyone to see, even if you don't recognize that you're being a jerk in the process. I have a couple of clients that they present themselves as just these highly spiritual people who are out here to help everybody, and I'm just kind of going like, oh boy, you people have a shadow that's a mile long. I just don't want to be in the same room when it comes out. Anyway, the psychologist James Hillman, who is a follow-on person from Carl, he had this lovely quote that I just loved, which caused me to start reading up on him. He said in an interview one time, we are all scandals, but each different, of course. The shadow is all the scandalous stuff that you don't want let out, you don't want to see. You don't want to get it. And Jung himself was often quoted by people who knew him as saying, when you're in the midst of dealing with these unconscious patterns in depth, we're all in the same soup. Welcome to the group. You're enjoying it. And a third quote, this was from Ian White, who's the Australian naturopath who came up with the Australian bush flower. And I was in a workshop with him 30 some years ago. And one of the things that he said was, you are only as sick as your darkest secrets. As long as you can keep the shadow as a secret, you don't have to deal with it. But it's this lingering chronic illness that you have to deal with at some point. So you just have to realize that, as a practitioner, you are going to have to deal with people's shadow stuff. They're going to have to deal with their shadow stuff. And you don't want to run away from it. It feels horrible. It's icky. It's terrible. It hurts. But until you go through that dark pathway and resolve it and bring that stuff up to awareness, person's not going to get better. Because the shadow doesn't go away until you engage with it. And you need to be ready to connect with the person energetically at that shadow level and bring it to work. And part of this healing process, okay. One last thought before I do that program. We talked about that the fire was doing the healing. Really, the best healer is just conscious awareness. If you're consciously aware of these patterns, the patterns will change. They get better. The only thing the fire enemies do is they bring things up to you. Conscious awareness a lot faster than they would be otherwise. So they act as catalysts to the healing process because they're saying like, oh, your energy pattern is doing this. This is the energy pattern I have. Here, try this on for size for and see what happens. And when you start to experience that different way of behaving inside yourself, all of a sudden everything's just kind of like works its way out pretty easily. Okay, but that takes a bit of commitment to your path. It takes a while of just learning a skill deeply and not being aware to just like jump into the swamp and deal with this stuff. It's only when you run away from the dark side of the healing process that you wind up doing flimsy work. And particularly people who like to be love and light too much, you're missing out a great opportunity to actually do the deep work here. Okay, now, speaking of transition times, I am in one of the most interesting ones I've ever had in my whole life. I just recently turned to the age of 70, and I realized working in a dysfunctional store is not as appealing to me as doing what I want to do and collecting Social Security. What does it mean to step away from that whole working environment and become a new person who operates by this different set of rules? And I will say the last year and a half has been some of the most stressful and deeply radically change-worthy periods of my entire life. I was not prepared for how intense this change was going to be for myself. It's a lot more work than I expected. But I approach it with this one major commitment. When you're in a work environment, you have to like deal with other people. And one of the things you do is you put on this lovely mask that kind of like hides your true feelings from other people. This is another word that Jung invented. It's called persona, which is just a Greek word meaning mask. In particular, the theater masks that actors would wear in Greek theater plays. And it just says like, the character that I am, that's not who I'm doing. I'm playing someone else. And so I'm gonna wear this mask so you relate to the mask rather than relate to me. And so it's just this way of putting on a persona and a change that keeps you from having to deal with people of that more difficult and vulnerable fashion here. When you retire from working like that, you don't have to deal with these dysfunctional work environments anymore. You reach a point where you can start to strip off the mask. And when you strip it off, you realize like, oh, all those behavior patterns I've really practiced for the last 50 years do not apply anymore. I don't have to deal with these masks when I'm alone in my own apartment. And so I've been approaching this whole period of life with just a major commitment is when you peel off all those external layers that are not who you really are, what's left? Who are you when you get rid of all these false stories that are not who you really are? And learning to address who you are without all these false stories is, God, that's a lot of work. It's a level of vulnerability that it's really, really tough to address if you haven't tried to do it before. And it also means that you're moving, the old stories that you told yourself don't apply anymore. I wasn't sure whether I was going to tell you this, but I'll pull it out of here. In pagan mythologies, there's a idea of a story called the triple goddess. How does the female psyche change and grow through the lifetime? It starts as the young daughter, goes into the mother or the matron, and then when you're done with that, all those lives, and go to the next transition, then you approach the idea of what's called the crone, or the elderly woman. And so, it's like the young person, the middle-aged person, and the elder. Okay, that's a beautiful one for women, but what's the equivalent for guys? We go through stages like this too. You got got young boyhood, and we've got a manhood where we're virile and doing our work and making a living, and then at some point, then we retire and get your gold watch, and we have to deal with what does it mean to be an elder. What does elder mean? If you've never been an elder before, this is like, I don't know, how do we deal with this thing? With all due respect to Miriam and I had this discussion many times, but I think in America, there's a triple God thing like this too, but in America, it's usually experienced and addressed in like more down to earth kind of level. And I say, the triple God American style is you got the kid, you got the dude, and you got the old fart. The old fart is where you can put aside all the masks and all the behaviors and all the expectations on yourself. You get to be who you are, and you just get to be the cantankerous old fart that you're really meant to be deep down underneath all this stuff. I am having a blast discovering my old fart. I think this is really, and you could say, yeah, elder, he's kind of like a godlike figure, and he stands up on a pedestal. But the old fart actually lives in here now. The rest of us here. The old, the elder God gets more respect. The old fart is the person who just sits on the porch and, you kids get out of my lawn. I've been practicing. You get down off the pedestal. You just get to just be yourself. Now, old farts don't get as much respect as they probably deserve. Part of it is just that this is kind of like the end or the later chapters of their life story and their spiritual path. It's the same path they've been traveling the whole time. You never get off the path. But it's a path that made more sense back 30, 40, 50 years ago, maybe. And it looks kind of old fashioned and kind of grimy, and young kids look at you and they say like, hey, pops, just cool it. Just, get off your high horse. And the problem is not that they aren't being following their spiritual energies. It's just that it's energies from a different time that aren't necessarily in harmony with the energies now. We need to learn how to express this, the energy that's native to you through time, through the whole life. And even if it doesn't really fit in with what's going on now, guess what? That's great. You've still got something to present to people. And in fact, with a repository of all the wisdom that's been going on from ages before us. And we can hopefully pass on this knowledge and wisdom to new people without sounding too obnoxious about it. It's funny, when I came up with the title for this talk, the spirit of energetic healing, I really didn't even know what I was going to talk about. Like I said, my first inspiration is just kind of like, someone opened the top of your head and forced the ideas in there, and you're like, oh, what does all that mean? I have to clear it. So I just feverishly got out a Post-it note. So this was the first draft of the talk. And it took me like months and months and months to figure out what's on this piece of paper. Had some great conversations with Miriam on these things.
You have about 6 minutes left.
Oh, God.
I wanted you to have a chance to talk about your formula if you wanted
Yeah,
to wrap up
yeah,
with that
yeah,
still,
okay.
Marty.
So anyway, what's the process of eldering? What does it mean to go through the transition here? And what kind of healing goes with it? This is not something that's really addressed very well in our culture. Usually it's this long slide into irrelevance and being a burden on other people. Your health goes down, you get senile, you're just kind of getting ready for, the next step. It seems like the whole elder process kind of gets collapsed into like, you retire, you get your coffin, go away, leave this alone. But there's a lot that goes on in this period, and we need to really, really figure out how to treat all the stuff that's going on in between here. Curious enough, I was trying to figure out what are some good remedies for this eldering process. And frankly, looking through the repertoire, I'm going, there really isn't a lot that addresses this stuff. This is kind of like virgin territory that we should be exploring. You need to find some plants to talk to us. So we got some, it's a bad myth, basically. This is not the way to treat people. It's sure not a very healthy way to treat people. There's a different way that we need to address these issues and heal things. Reminds me of a dream that I had a year or so ago, where basically I was just coming up to people in the dream, and all I would do is just place my hand in different spots of their body. And I had a narrator in the dream who was kind of like telling me what the dream interpreted itself. And it said, the narrator said that people need to be seen, heard, and touched to feel real in this life. And we still need that. We still need to be relevant. We still need to have our importance and our dignity recognized. Instead of just becoming invisible for the world. In fact, if you look at the path, it's like one big long sentence, from birth to death. We look at elder as just kind of like the last word in the sentence, and then there's this big fat period where you go away, or if you're lucky and believe in an afterlife, it's going to be ... instead of a period. But we go through many phases, and hopefully we keep maturing and growing and becoming simpler, because we don't have to play all these games anymore. And we just need to find the ones that help us through these transitions, because a well-lived life is much more important than just like, done working, bye, leave me alone. So, perhaps, what eldering is really about is just putting your life in order, putting your energy body in order, getting back on your path, because you've been on detours for 50 years. This is one thing that I found very fascinating about my particular path, is that as I started tripping off these things, my body spontaneously started getting rid of stuff. And I realized a lot of this stuff is 40, 50 years old, and I'm still carrying it around. That's how old some of these blobs are that we're getting rid of here. You need to get rid of a whole lifetime of all these things that have twisted and distorted you into something that's not really who you are. And in fact, if you think in karmic terms, the best thing that you can do during your elder years is just to get rid of all these patterns and all these blobs and all these distorted patterns. Clear that all stuff all up so that you are basically getting back to a nice, simple, clean state that you don't have to carry into the next lifetime. That's healing when you're like, not only healing this life, but healing the next life. So we need to get all that stress and tension out of us and start working on the level. So basically, you're working on letting go of all these patterns at all the different levels of the PEM system that no longer apply or no longer part of your life. They don't have any worth to you anymore. I have been so pleased to find out that one of the liberating phrases I can use constantly when I address my own patterns is like, I don't give a shit about that anymore. That doesn't mean anything to me. And just being able to say, go away, leave me alone. You can just get rid of all that stuff. And when you let go of all these emotional attachments and learn acceptance of things instead, it simplifies your energy body so nicely, and it just feels infinitely better than you did before. And this leads to, this letting go process leads to something, this is a key phrase that some of the people that I've said this to just really resonate with it. It's what I call the process of successful grieving. Successful grieving. Realize like, oh yeah, these old patterns and so on, that I've been holding on to these behaviors, these things that were important to me. You can let go of it. You have to mourn it, you have to let go, you have to cry, you have to do all this, but if you're successful at it, those patterns go away and you're free to do the next thing instead. Few little things, I just want to talk about some of the details because I was fascinated by the way my energy body has been responding to this period. I'm sorry I gotta run over, but it's gonna have to happen. Take it level by level, physically. One of the things I found as I started to emotionally break away from the story and realize like, I don't worry about this stuff. If my coworkers are gonna be assholes towards me, doesn't matter. I don't care. What their opinion of me is not gonna matter when I'm not here anymore. I'm gonna be someone else. And money doesn't matter because I know I'm taken care of at this point. I could be making more now that I'm retired than I was making when I was working. And just all these things are like, that doesn't matter anymore. This is great. Well, when you reach that level of acceptance of what your position is, all that tension and stress you've been carrying around in your body doesn't move, doesn't matter anymore. And your body just naturally just opens up because the stress starts to move out. Due to not only the stress of living, but also some major medical problems that I've had in my life. I've had tension in my spine that I've been carrying around for years and years and years. I've had vertebrae in my neck that have been out of alignment for decades, 40, 50 years in some cases, particularly from this one surgery that I had. Those vertebrae have nothing to do with it. They're painful and stressful. And you can do anything you want to, and they're not going to change. And now I'm finding all of a sudden, I just stretch your neck, pop, 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 pop. Things, the stress that's being held in the body and in the musculature and the nervous system is, as that evaporates, you can't hold the tension anymore. Because your body doesn't do tension anymore. And that's great. Other physical things I've been noticing my diet changing. Things that used to taste really good don't taste good to me anymore. There's just all sorts of things. Emotionally is probably the biggest cesspool that you need to deal with. There's a lot of, life is difficult. And it hurts sometimes. And you hold on to those pains sometimes for years and years and years. There's lots of emotions that have been pent up, and pent up emotions are also going to you don't you don't experience your emotions right away, they're gonna show up as blobs. And as the blobs start to like fall apart, you realize, oh yeah, there's a lot of anger and resentment and pain and mourning and grieving and so on that you've never allowed yourself to experience properly. Well, guess what? You get to do it now. Fun stuff. My thoughts are changing. I mean, the ideas I'm putting in my book, these are really different than it was when I started this book. And of course, then you actually also going through the whole spiritual element. So as a case history, I am just fascinated by things that are just spontaneously happening to me without me even having to try it. The body just says like, it's time to heal, it's time to let go. It lets go. And you just stand back and you're like, wow, that was amazing. Where'd that come from? You know, and if you got the right remedies, then you can, you know, consider a little bit of fun. But you're deconstructing yourself. It's really, really kind of interesting. So this is called one of my old fart rants and raves. I just have to put this out real fast. As I said, when that young woman came into the store last week, we spew out a few words about she wanted to fit wanted some remedies for her. I'm kind of coming to this conclusion as I start to study the people who've been coming to the store lately, is that you're not healing illnesses or diseases or the problems, you're healing words. People are hanging on to words as labels for who they are and what they're doing. You know, I've got depression, I've got this problem, I've got that problem. And what they really want you to do is fix their words. They're not really wanting to fix themselves. And a lot of the people in the store who, as practitioners, drive me nuts, they're just healing words. And what the words are doing is that they are blinding you to what the real underlying problem is. They're keeping you from understanding the empty body. It's a form of psychological dissociation. And as I'm starting to understand about the whole trauma mechanism and how it relates to the blobs, is that one of the key symptoms of every blob as you run into is that the ego level is totally dissociated from the contents of the blob. It's like an old experience or something that, you know, some childhood trauma or whatever. And the only way you knew how to deal with it was just like encapsulate it in the shell, put it in the closet, stop thinking about it. And as long as you don't have to worry about it, you're fine. Yeah, I'm fine. No. But you're working in kind of a quick fashion at that point on. And what we really need to be doing is like breaking down that pattern of just trying to encapsulate everything in just a few key words, and then using that as, oh, you need this remedy. This is the essence of what I call good form type describing. Is like, you gave me this word, here's the remedy for that word, and we're just treating words. We need to really kind of get back to what's the real person, what's the real energy body that's going on here. And that's a deeper level. You know, another phrase that I use for this is repertory blindness. We're so used to the terminology that's in the repertory. I used to have some people would come in and they've been studying the FES since repertory. And they say like, oh, I need that remedy and that remedy and that remedy. And I always tell them, just put the damn book down, talk to me. We need to have a conversation about what's really happening, not that word salad that you're using to hide from what the real problems are. So words are the new illnesses. They're the things that we hang all our toxic stories on. And if we can get rid of the toxic stories, that's when the healing starts. You're just using these words and labels as something to hide from the real experience. And it's when you hide from the real experience that you're ill. When you actually can acknowledge your experiences, that's when you start to get better. So, and of course, as practitioners, we fall in that bad habit too. We need to get past good for type work and just really start to listen to the person. This was a really summed up best fight. I had a client for my bodywork practice. He was coming in for a lot of really, really deep work. She was in the process of terminal stages of breast cancer. So I I lost contact with her eventually, but she was also a body worker in her own regard. So we could really talk shop with each other at a very, very deep level. And they were some of the most profound bodywork sessions I ever had with any client I've ever had in 30 some years. But we kind of came to a conclusion one time that what these people are really saying with this word salad of theirs is, I want to be fixed, but I don't want to change. And what people really want to do is they want to feel alive. They want to just come back to themselves. So, blah, 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 we can skip some of that stuff, but the old fart formula, I was going to promise everyone, we are going to actually talk about a few remedies here. These are the remedies that are working for me. Now I'm somewhere through my process here. So what do we have in here? You can take notes. These will be give you a really, really good description of all the stuff I didn't want to admit to coming in here today. But frankly, this level of being open is makes me very, very vulnerable, and I've been nervous about this whole thing. But okay, there's nine remedies in old fart formula. First of all was olive. One of the things that I noticed right away when I quit working full time at the store was I was exhausted. I just realized I can't do this anymore. I'm just completely emptied out, done. And that's been 2.5 months now. I can't sit up through the exhaustion yet. I'm still working on that one. But, so olives for that. Walnut. So one of the box remedies for going through transition periods, as well as dealing with the people who are holding you back from making these successful transitions. Get rid of those people too. So, okay. Willow is your old form. You know, there's a lot of feeling like, look at all the stuff I've had to deal with in life. No. Willow let you. They're like, get over it. Buttercup is where you're feeling like people aren't really paying attention to and appreciating you for the skills and the abilities that you have, and they're just kind of ignoring it, and you just kind of like disappearing into the corner someplace. Miriam said I had borage in there, strengthening the heart, strengthening the ability to just have the courage to deal with life. Lady Slipper. Lady Slipper is a very complicated remedy. And when Matt was here talking about it, you know, he and I had a little private conversation in the middle of his talking about Lady Slipper. Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't get it. Yeah, he says, I don't either. So, but one of the things that Lady Slipper does, it regulates the flow of energy through the whole chakra system from head to foot. And it regulates the nervous system. And one of the things that Matt shows up in his book, Seven Herbs, Plants as Teachers, whatever the title is. It's a great book. If you should copy of it, read it. I read it about once every 2 years because it's amazing stuff. But he says about Lady Slipper is that particularly for healers, these are for people who, for some reason or another, just never feel like they know enough and are always feeling like, you know, I'm not good enough to be a healer. And he says this one acts as your spiritual diploma that tells you you really do know what you know. Quit kidding yourself. Let's just allow yourself to be the expert that you really are. Okay, the last three here, these are the key ones in the front, the ones that I actually started out with first, and the other ones were just add-ons. First one I thought about was pink monkey flower. Pink monkey flower. My nickname for this one is welcome back to the human race. It is for people who are bogged down by guilt and shame and feeling like they're just not good enough, and that if other people really know who they are, they would think you're just a horrible person. And so they're really trying to like hide. much as they possibly can. They've got layers and layers and layers and layers of masks to keep people out from seeing that horrible thing that's hiding inside them. One of the particular manifestations of pink monkey flower, so get the phrase right. Imposter syndrome, where you're afraid that people will find out that you really don't know what you're talking about, and that they'll lose their respect for you. And I was realizing when I was first starting to work with these notes back in May, God, do I have that in spades? Yeah. And so, okay, we'll throw that one in. Black-eyed Susan, one of the critical ones in the FES set for dealing with when your shadow issues are starting to come up and need to be addressed. If you don't really want to know what's in your garbage can, don't take black-eyed Susan. And the last one is one from Australia, which is Sturt Desert Pea. Sturt, S-T-U-R-T, Desert Pea. Sturt was the name of a British explorer who did a lot of exploring in Australia back in the 1800s or something, before the Europeans colonized the continent. So everything is named Sturt in Australia. Sturt Desert Pea, and there's a lot of great stories that are associated with it. It's got a lot of mythology, usually associated with star-crossed lovers in the Aboriginal world, where one of them dies and the other one, basically dies out of mourning and grief. And when their bodies have been dissipated into the earth, they become the desert pea plates. Yeah. The key slogan for this one is breathing. Letting go of the past and all the hurt that you've experienced, and realizing you don't have to carry this around with you for your whole life. You can pass on to the next stage and take on. And the whole transition process, particularly the elderly process, is one of doing a lot of grieving, letting go, and then realizing all the beautiful stuff that you have after you strip off all that stuff. So that's my memory.
Would you be so kind as to say again the names of each of them? Because it's all about the name of the remedy and how to take it at the bottom. It's nothing about the person.
Yeah, if you want to, you can cut my notes if you can up.
The handout?
Yeah, well, it's not a handout, but my notes have them all.
You just want to read it on your way out.
Read it on the way out. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question. So would you say the shadow level is in the spiritual level since it's unconscious?
But it's the first, it's the welcome back to the unconscious. There's a lot beyond that.
And then would you say that, you know, the other levels, the physical, emotional, mental, are clues to what remedy would lead to the spiritual level
No,
healing?
no. These are 4 different forms of perception. What we're trying to do is figure out, when you experience someone's energy body, how do you experience it? You experience its physical matter, you experience its emotions, and physical thoughts, or you can have higher spiritual things. Those are things that the observer, the practitioner uses to make sense of the energy body. But they aren't the energy body themselves. They're your interpretations of it.
So they form a gestalt, like you're looking at the pattern.
Yeah, it's like the difference between experiencing someone with your eyes versus your ears versus your sense of touch versus their smell. I mean, those are different senses. Well, the PEMS, they operate like different senses, but it's kind of more energetic or psychological way of looking at things. And it's very easy to confuse it and to assume that when you say like, there's this emotional quality that I experience in your energy and say like, it's in your energy. But no, the energy is just what it is. but it's your perceptions that put the emotional quality to it. Similar for the other ones. So this is where I split the role of the client from the role of the observer. And that's a real key part of the way, the approach that I have in my book is this, this is the way that the energy body works. It has these qualities, but you experience it in these ways. And you experience it as being distributed in certain spatial configurations around you. And if you switch the way that you're perceiving things in the state of consciousness you're observing, you switch from one level to the other, and you start to see different things going on in the energy body, just depending on the level that you're operating at any given time. So it's part of the observer, it's not for the client.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
And I knew I was going to be